Hello, everyone. Welcome back to More Than Amuse Mystery Month, Murder Mystery Month. My name is Sadie.
I'm Stani. I know this episode is coming at you all a little bit late,
Mhm.
but we're so happy you're here and excited for this episode, even though this one, should we say, is like the most horrific?
Yeah, I think that's why it was hard to sit down and do the research because it was just like, do I want to read about a horrible man who mistreated women?
No.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I've
So,
noticed a pattern that whenever there's like topics we're excited about, the research goes really easily. And
mhm.
whenever there's topics that we want to talk about, but it's not as fun for
Yeah,
us,
not as fun at all.
it's definitely like a slower process.
Yes.
And this is definitely one of those, like, I'm glad we chose the topic, glad we're talking about it.
Mhm.
Not glad that this happened.
Mhm.
Definitely would
Exactly.
have been better if it never would have, but
Yeah. And to give it away then, so today we're talking about Alfred Hitchcock, and I guess more specifically, the women behind Hitchcock,
mhm.
and also a little bit about the man and the unfortunate dark side that is behind one
Yeah.
of the greatest filmmakers of all time, or I guess what is known as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And also trigger warning just from the beginning that
Yeah.
it seems like it's like Harvey Weinstein with
Yes.
the allegations and just how everything, unfortunately, like it's a dark man's world in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And this episode I'll be discussing that. I was telling Stani right before we started recording that I don't necessarily want it to be like, and this is how he assaulted her, and this is how he assaulted her. So I'm not gonna go in like each gruesome detail of every single interaction he had with women, but like trigger warning that we'll be discussing some of the things that happened and
Yeah.
going over some of the allegations. And so if that is triggering to you, that's totally fair. And
Totally fair.
I'll put a disclaimer before I say anything specific about
Yeah.
anything like that. So,
We've been doing a lot more of these, like, the women behind episodes,
mhm,
and it's not just, like, create a hate campaign towards these
totally.
famous men. It's just to create awareness for a lot of the women that were suppressed or overlooked because of the famous men that generally stood next to them. It originally was just to be, like, an awareness thing, and it turned into the fact that a lot of these women were so suppressed because of the abuse and, like, sexism that happened
Yeah.
by the famous men. And honestly, it's shocking every time we find it. Like, it's
Mhm.
never something that we go into it being like, "Oh, I heard Hitchcock was a horrible man to all of his
Yeah.
actresses. We should talk about him." It's like, "Oh, there's so many women around Hitchcock. Like, we should
Mhm.
talk about that." And then we find out that he totally sucks. So,
Yeah. So true.
yeah, it seems to be a repeating pattern that we're finding that when there's a lot of women that are being obscured by a more famous man, it's generally he's abusive and
Yeah. It's
harmful.
unfortunately a reason. Yeah, that's so true. And another episode in this format that we did was the women behind Elvis. So
Yes.
that's another episode you can check out. And it's, I guess, on theme because next month there is a movie coming out called Priscilla. And I can't wait to watch that movie. And I will definitely be doing a recap of how I feel about that when it comes out. But
Yes.
just had to bring that up, though. That's another episode we've done. And also, that movie is coming out so soon. I cannot
Yeah.
wait.
And if you have any warm, fuzzy feelings about Elvis, they will be dashed by that
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. So
I'm
fair
sorry.
warning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing, Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully no one has, like, warm, fuzzy feelings about Alfred Hitchcock. Maybe I don't think
That's true. Less
yeah.
likely, or maybe just like the unawareness. Like I didn't know that there was all these allegations behind him. We talked about one of the kind of women behind Hitchcock when we talked about
Yeah.
Grace Kelly, and we mentioned that and talked all about it. And I had no idea until now the research for this episode.
No
Sorry,
idea at all.
no idea.
Well, should we introduce Hitchcock before we dive into everything
Let's
else?
do it.
Cool.
So, first off, there is a book that goes right along with this episode that we're doing today. It was published more recently. So, like, recently enough that it was like almost a couple weeks ago that this book came. Like,
It
we didn't
was,
have
yeah, I
time.
think Hitchcock and His Blondes?
Yep, Hitchcock's
Yeah.
Blondes.
It came out 2 weeks
Yeah,
ago?
literally 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So very timely with our episode that we then discovered the existence of this book. But yeah, it's called Hitchcock's Blondes by Lawrence Leamer. And the subtitle is The Unforgettable Women Behind the Legendary Director's Dark Obsession. So I just wanted to shout out that book. We'll be doing a deep dive, but we won't be going in as fully as, of course, a book can. So
Yeah.
if you want to learn more about the women that we're discussing and the connections to the director, I would definitely recommend that book. Obviously, we haven't read it because that book has only been out for like a week or two and we weren't able to read it in preparation for the episode, but check it out. So let's talk about Hitchcock. First, I want to talk about this thing called the auteur theory, I think. I
I'm
don't know.
assuming it's French. So yeah, probably.
Very true, actually.
Auteur?
Auteur theory.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, but it's a theory of filmmaking where basically that it's the director is viewed as the major creative force in a motion picture. And it holds that the director who oversees all audio, visual elements of the motion picture is more to be considered the author of the movie than the writer, which of the screenplay. In other words, it's basically like that the visual elements as like camera placement, blocking, lighting, and scene length rather than plot line convey the message of the film. So I thought
That's
that
an
was an
interesting thing
yeah.
to think about where it's like kind of put them parallel to one another. I don't know. I
Yeah.
always thought of it more as a partnership. So it's very interesting to think about the idea that they view
The director is more of
yeah,
the
like the artist of the
yeah.
film.
I agree. I think that that's something that I've I just think as I've gotten older, I've started to watch more of the artsy movies where it's like all about who the director is, that now I can see, oh, the director actually matters. But I feel like when I was younger and growing up, I was like, what does director even mean? Who cares? Like, it's just about what the movie is. Now that it's like I've seen just more movies and tried to watch more highbrow movies, I'm like, oh, actually, like camera angle, lighting, like those things do matter.
Yeah,
And those things are all decided by the director.
true.
But no,
And they
I
all have
agree.
very distinct styles. Like you think of Wes
Yes.
Anderson, you can pick up
Mhm.
it's a Wes Anderson film from a mile away. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So yeah, that is a theory that has been I don't know if everyone necessarily agrees with it because supporters of the theory further contend that the most cinematically successful films will bear the unmistakable personal stamp of the director.
Hmm.
So, it's essentially just the argument of if it's the best movies are the ones where you can tell that person directed it. And I guess that makes sense where it's like you can really see the artfulness of the movie and the thoughtfulness behind it that like maybe it would make it a better movie in some regards for
Uh,
sure.
That's interesting. It's such a case for such like film bro movie. I really think
Totally.
of Quentin Tarantino or,
Mhm.
even how Alfred Hitchcock himself that it's like they have like a genre of film that belongs to them.
Yeah.
But it's a weird because then it's like there's some movies that are so beloved and you have no idea who the director
Who
is.
directed them? Yeah, or they're not necessarily as much of a household name director.
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of interesting thought. I wonder what film people like think of that idea.
I know. That's what I thought too. And the reason why I felt the need to define that is because so many articles that I was finding were like all referring to him as like the auteur or like really just pointing out the fact that he did have such a distinct style. Obviously, the fact that even Hitchcock blondes have become such a thing, like
Yeah.
it's very, very distinct, the movies that he would make and the women behind them, the stories that he would tell. And you know what? We're going to talk about all the ways we hate him, but like he did do incredible things for movies and
Yeah.
on the movies he did. And
True.
for like horror, not horror films, but yeah, I guess horror films, thrillers, mysteries, all those things. But to, I guess, then summarize it. So, the master of suspense, I love this quote. Alfred Hitchcock's cinematic legacy is unparalleled. Over the course of his illustrious career that spanned more than 60 years, he made over 50 feature films, with many of those, including North by Northwest, Vertigo, and Psycho, are now considered an indispensable part of filmmaking history. His time in the industry didn't come without its own controversies, however, and was tarnished by several questionable decisions and archaic attitudes. And I'll go into some of them later. Real quick, have you ever seen a Hitchcock movie? Or which ones have you
Yeah.
seen? Mhm.
I've seen Rear Window.
Yes. That's the one I've seen
And
too.
so
Okay,
I've
cool.
seen a couple. I think when we covered Grace Kelly in our
Mhm.
episode that we did, which by the way, if anyone wants to check out that episode, I know you already mentioned it, but
Mhm. It's
it's a
the
good
Hollywood
one.
Starlets. Yep.
Yeah. When we covered her, I ended up watching a couple of Grace Kelly movies because she was the only one I hadn't seen movies for when we did that
Mhm.
episode. And I think they were both Hitchcock films.
Hitchcock
So it was Rear
films.
Window and To Chase a Thief, which by the way, they were both really good.
Yeah, I will say, like, when I watched those, I think I watched them too around the same time that we did that episode for the same reason, but I was surprised just, like, watching Rear Window, like, genuinely how scared I was.
Yeah.
You know, because I think sometimes now with the horror films, like, I'm like, "Oh, if I'm not seeing a creepy, like, horror face or the special effects aren't right, is it really gonna live up to I don't know, is it gonna actually be suspenseful?" But I was on the edge of my seat, like, watching that movie, so he's a very effective filmmaker.
Yes,
So
definitely. I will say, if you want a really subtle one, To Catch a Thief has some suspense, but it's more of a romance.
good to
So,
know.
yeah, if you're looking for a little bit of some spookiness, like, not
Yeah.
really, that one's a good one.
That is interesting. Another thing, so the Hitchcockian style includes the use of editing, camera movement to mimic a person's gaze, thereby turning viewers into voyeurs and framing shots to just really maximize anxiety and fear. There was a film credit named Robin Wood. He wrote that the meaning of a Hitchcock film is there in the method, in the progression from shot to shot. A Hitchcock film is an organism with the whole implied in every detail and every detail related to the whole. I'm going to talk about
Interesting.
the movie The Birds, but and the bad thing about that
Yeah.
movie The Birds, but I watched a YouTube video really analyzing oh wait, no, it wasn't The Birds, it was Psycho, which I think Psycho is one of the most famous
Yeah, I think
movies,
his most famous.
yeah, Bates Motel, all of it. The video pointed out the ways that like how the birds that are in the shots, like the stuffed birds, are like so for example, whenever the woman is in the shot, there's always like birds that are like the little like songbirds that are the stuffed birds in the background. But then when it's ever on the killer, there is like the hawks, the stuffed hawks that are in the background. So there's
Oh.
really that small little attention to detail to like really just like fully tell the story. And the YouTube video like did a whole breakdown of a scene like showing about how he used birds in the movie Psycho to really like tell the
Interesting.
story and convey the characters, which I was really intrigued by. And then coincidentally, then it was the movie The Birds that the one that was done right after that. So
Right before you dive into that, just a few
yes,
more things about Hitchcock. I wanna mention, like, his accolades before we get into the fact that he's a
yeah,
scumbag.
I was just
Because
gonna say, I was like, I feel
yeah,
weird singing his praises, but like
yeah,
just to provide the
but I
context.
just wanna show, like, how beloved he is by, like, film history because I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really important to realize that.
Yeah.
So, his career actually spanned 6 decades, and he directed over 50 feature films. These are still, like, widely watched in studies, like, if you take a film class, you'll probably watch a Hitchcock film at some point,
Mm-hmm.
if not multiple. He also is really well known for doing cameo roles in his films, which I thought was
Mm,
funny, so I guess if you watch it, look out for him.
watch out
He's
for
probably
him.
in there somewhere. In total, he's had 46 Academy Award nominations for his films, 6 wins, but he never won the award for Best Director, which makes me feel
Wow.
like a little justified.
Yeah.
Before he started in film, he actually was a technical clerk and copywriter, and his first role in film was actually a title card designer.
Oh.
So it was like that page that comes up with the title of the movie you have to
Mhm.
buy before the film starts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He has a lot of notable films. I'll list them really quick
Cool.
to organize them. Blackmail, which actually was like the first British talkie, so the first British movie that wasn't silent. 39 Steps, The Lady Vanishes, Foreign Correspondent, Rebecca,
Oh,
which
yeah.
we've talked about
Mhm.
that book a lot. He did the first film adaptation. Suspicion, A Shadow of a Doubt, Notorious, Lifeboat, Spellbound, Rear Window, Psycho, Rope, Strangers on a Train, Dial M for Murder, To Catch a Thief, The Trouble with Harry, Vertigo, North by Northwest, The Birds, and Marnie. What is interesting is his psychological thriller Vertigo is actually listed as the British Film Institute's greatest film ever made based on a poll of hundreds of film critics.
Wow.
Yeah, so
That's a
apparently we need to watch that one because goodness gracious. And then as of 2021, 9 of his films have been selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry, including his personal favorite one, which was Shadow of a Doubt. And he has received the BAFTA Fellowship, the AFI Life Achievement Award, and he was even knighted.
whoa. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. That's crazy.
4 months before his death, he was knighted because he's British, so he's technically Sir Alfred Hitchcock, I guess. But yeah, just to show you, like, his films are highly regarded. He was highly regarded as, like, a visionary. Like, this is the dark side of that, that there's more that went into that than people are willing
Mhm.
to talk about, and I that's important.
No, I fully agree. So now the dark side of
Mhm.
Hitchcock, and then after you'll maybe talk more specifically about the women. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing about him is that he very famously had very strange attitudes regarding females and women. And he saying, I saw this quote where it says he seemed simultaneously terrified and mesmerized by young blonde girls and was openly antagonistic towards womankind in general. And listen, like Hitchcock blondes, it's a thing. The movies, they're all beautiful, icy blonde women.
Yeah. I
They're everywhere.
think even in one of our first episodes, we talked about the film trope, and we talked about, like, the icy, cool blonde who was the Hitchcock blonde is the other name for it.
Hmm.
He literally created a stereotype of woman in
Yeah.
his films by this, like, cold, unattached, beautiful blonde woman.
Yeah, exactly. Some of
Yeah.
the names, so there's June Howard-Tripp, Madeleine Carroll, Ingrid Bergman, Grace Kelly, Janet Leigh, Kim Novak, Eva Marie Saint, and Tippi Hedren. They starred in 14 of Hitchcock's most notable films, and definitely, I think they got some of the worst of his abuse. And through their stories, I think you can really see who the man is. Apparently, like he would think of him as his blondes. So he obviously felt very possessive towards them. I'm going to tell one story that I think really sets the tone for what happened here.
It's horrifying.
So I'm going to talk about Tippi Hedren.
Yeah.
So the movie The Birds, it was a huge undertaking and apparently like one of the biggest, like hardest productions of his entire career. And part of that reason why was because he casted a complete novice, someone who was new to acting as the lead role, which was Tippi Hedren. And she was led by Hitchcock step by step through the entire script. But like it was her first role ever. She did well, but it was her first role ever. So it's like very intense. But there's this infamous scene in which the main actress is savaged by birds and Tippi definitely experienced very legitimate trauma because before filming began, she had been assured that there'd be no live birds involved in the action. And so they basically said, or she thought that there was going to be like mechanical ravens that were going to be the ones attacking her, like they wouldn't actually be birds. But as the day approached, I guess Hitchcock realized that it wouldn't get like the realism and intensity that they were after unless they used real animals. So I'm going to be quoting Tippi here. So as Hedren remembers, as that she found out about the change of plans on the morning of the shoot. Quote, it was brutal and ugly and relentless. She says of the 5 days she spent on the floor of the set while birds were thrown at her head, the crew members who have spoken about it over the years attest that they all, apparently, this is weird, like Hitchcock included, felt bad about the situation, where it's like, okay, well, he didn't obviously feel that bad.
Yeah.
In 1980, she said, very hard for Hitch at this time. He wouldn't come out of the office until we were absolutely ready to shoot because he couldn't stand to watch it. Okay. But now, in I think more recent years, she now will suggest that that was almost like his effort to dominate her and to control her.
I'm so confused on why they needed to use
Like,
live birds.
I like get that, sure. The technology wasn't probably good enough that the live birds would like actually look as, like I get it. But like you're writing a horror book or horror movie about how a woman is suffering from birds attacking her and then you're like, we're just going to torture
Have
her.
birds attack her
We're just
for
gonna do the
5
thing.
days.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Did you have to shoot it for 5 days?"
Yeah. And
I
it's somewhere later in my notes. I'm sure I'll get to it, but like essentially that there was like a doctor on set that was like, you have to stop. Like she had sores on her because they were throwing birds at her.
there's no way that would be legal now, right?
I hope not. But I mean, granted, even still, I mean, you hear about stories of like directors like maybe
Well,
pushing
that's
actors
true.
very far in order to like get the best shot and I don't know,
Oh.
be the most artsy with it.
Thank
But
heavens for CG, I guess.
But to continue with how, like, he would dominate her, so in the publicity for the film, Hitchcock boasted about how he had invented Tippi, insisting, without real any explanation, that her name from now on be held between inverted commas, so like Tippi. Even when Hedren spoke to America's teenage girls through the pages of 17 magazine, Hitchcock was with her to explain to the interviewer how seriously he took building a career, and in this case, the actress cast to play her.
I'm always a little suspicious when you hear he's this renowned director and he chose an unknown starlet. And it's like, did you do that
Hawaii.
just so you could manipulate her? Because the
Yeah.
power dynamic is so off. Like it
Mm-hmm.
just seems a little fishy. It's like you just wanted someone you could control.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And at first, she didn't necessarily complain. There's a quote of her saying, "He was not only my director, he was my drama coach, which was fabulous." But
Mm.
then the problem was that outside of the film set, he also was just inserting himself into her life. He left food he wanted her to eat outside her front door, sent her a peculiar Valentine's message apparently, and just peppered her with requests for her to join him for dinners, lunches, drinks. When alone, he would tell her dirty stories and jokes that she wasn't comfortable with. She also alleges that one afternoon, Hitchcock, I guess, quick trigger warning, quote, threw himself on top of me and tried to kiss me in the back of a limo directly outside the hotel. Quote, "It was an awful, awful moment I'll always wish I could erase from my memory," which is horrible. The situation even worsened more in the movie that she starred in, Marnie. Actually, just side note, originally the role was intended for Grace Kelly, but then it ended up going to Tippi, where Hitchcock's unwelcome attention just continued. Like, what's so crazy is that, like, cast and crew members apparently saw it, but they were just like, oh, it's just an old man's crush. Like, it's nothing more, not a big deal.
But it's not okay. It was like, you
Yeah.
can't say that. Like, it's not harmless, obviously. Like, the power dynamic is so bad that even like a harmless crush is so
So,
harmful.
I know.
Yeah.
It went so far that, like, he forbade her from traveling to New York to receive a photo play award on the Tonight Show. And I don't necessarily if she knew why, but she now, like, later in her life interpreted it as just like this, strategy of just controlling her and possessing her. They had a
Yeah.
really ugly encounter between the two that apparently abruptly ended their professional and personal relationship, where Hitchcock spoke very rarely about went on, but when he did, his comments were like really evasive. But then the most he revealed was that Hedren had crossed a red line and referred to my weight.
So
So,
what? She like called him fat and
well,
he
here's
threw a
what
fit?
I think is happening. I feel like that's just like an excuse, where he's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, we don't really talk anymore. And I'm sure because she finally told him off of, you're controlling my
Um,
life. And then he's like, she called me fat. So that's why we're not talking. Which, like, like, whatever, don't be mean to people about their bodies, but I don't feel like that's what actually happened. That's just my
yeah.
guess. I don't But to continue on, another, trigger warning is that her version of events alleges that he sexually assaulted her.
Mm.
And the first mention of this story was mentioned in the early 1980s in Donald Spato's biography of Hitchcock. That was apparently a book that was created by Hitchcock's most faithful collaborators. So I don't know if he just mentioned that there was maybe some alleged thing. A further account was published by Donald Spoto in 2009, on which the movie The Girl, that came out in
Huh.
2012, was based, enlarging the image of Hitchcock as a sadistic misogynist who deliberately humiliated Hedren to satisfy his lust and his own feelings of inadequacy. Then in 2016, Hedren published her story in her own words. Quote, "I've never gone into detail about this and I never will. I'll simply say that he suddenly grabbed me and put his hands on me. It was sexual, it was perverse, and it was ugly, and I couldn't have been more shocked and more repulsed."
Yeah.
She actually published a memoir, almost poetically, right before all the allegations came out about Harvey
Mm.
Weinstein, and the whole Me Too movement really blew up as a response to that. And I think that, that it's poetic, not in a good way, of course, but I think it really just, I don't know. I hope that it made people who maybe weren't willing to believe her at first maybe be like, oh, okay. Because they had heard all these ways that he was like weird around women, that it's like, okay, maybe that means that that's true. And I think that's another thing where, like, for a long time, there's a lot of Hitchcock defenders, but it's like, why, I mean, I'll always believe a woman if she says somebody
Yeah.
sexually assaulted her, woman, always. But with this, especially, it's like, why would she have fabricated this entire story and then also taken the trouble to keep it alive? She was
Mhm.
repeatedly like It's not like she, like, let it die, like, no. This was true.
No, I, like, really wanna mention super quick is a lot of people will say, "Oh, false allegations," which has been thrown around a lot,
Mm,
especially, like, post Me Too, I feel like now
yeah,
that we're
that's true.
past almost 10 years actually past Me Too, I feel like it's
Yeah, whoa, that's so true.
yeah, becoming more of a thing, and just something to keep in mind, I looked up the exact statistic because I wanted to make sure I got it right, but 95%, actually, I think more than that, I think it's 95.5%
Mhm.
of sexual assault reports are true.
Ugh.
So that means there's only 4.5 that are false.
Mhm.
So if you're going just based off statistics,
It's
um,
better to yeah.
yeah, they're more than likely they're telling the truth. And so that's just an important thing to remember. Yeah, like what reason would she have to lie?
Yeah, no,
Hitchcock's
absolutely.
dead. It was her memoir. Like what kind of legacy would you want to leave? People don't
Mhm.
want to be known as like a sexual assault victim. Like that's not fun for
Yeah.
anybody.
That's the other thing too, where it's like, oh, yeah, that no one wants to be remembered as like, nobody wants
Yeah.
to get this. Like, that's not is it's insane to me.
So
I'm
yeah,
sure
so
it's
I
such
think
a
it's
whole
just
other rant.
important to remember that regardless of what anyone believes or says that worked with him, like she said that happened
Mhm.
and like yeah, it happened.
Totally. I loved this last little quote where, quote, Hitchcock spent decades publicizing the pleasure he took in possessing and molding beautiful young women. The fact that many of those women had nothing but good things to say about him, and several of them continue to even maybe talk fondly to him, does nothing to mitigate the experience of those who felt preyed on.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just another good point that it's like, just because one person has a great story or doesn't have that feeling, it doesn't negate the fact that others had really horrible traumatic experiences, and it doesn't make the validity questionable, you know?
Yeah. No, very, very
um
true.
just to briefly acknowledge too, for people who are watching on YouTube, that there was a bug that was in my face as you were giving the allegation statistics, so I'm just acknowledging that. So if
You're
you're like,
good.
what was she doing, there was a bug and it landed on my lip, so I
You're
had to do
fine.
something
Right
about
before
that.
that, when you were talking, I Googled something, so I'm sure my
Cool.
face looked weird too. So there
Cool.
you go.
Anyways, there's more stories I could go into. Like I said, I don't necessarily want to give the details of all of them, but like June Tripp, who had an allegation, and she was maybe one of the very first ones that maybe brought that up. In her 1960 memoir, The Glass Ladder, she described her treatment during the shoot for, I think it was The Lodger. Yes, the movie The Lodger. Quote, all I had to do, she wrote, was carry an iron tray of breakfast dishes up a long flight of stairs, but by the time Hitch was satisfied with the expression of fear on my face, I must have made the trek 20 times. The tray seemed to grow heavier and heavier every passing minute. During that exhausting hour and a half, I felt a strange, sickening pain somewhere in the region of my appendix scar, but forbore to complain or ask for a rest because delicate actresses are a bore and a nuisance, and in any case, the scene ended my work on the film. It also effectively ended her film career. A few months before the shoot, Tripp had an appendectomy. The constant repetition of that stair scene caused a rupture, and she was lucky to survive a second operation. So,
Was I'm so
just
lost. Was it
insane.
necessary for her to walk up and down the flight
Well,
of
I
stairs
think
20 times?
well, yeah, but he's probably like, "Oh, but I'm an artist," and then she'll actually have the right level of fear in her eyes, and that will make the scene that much more believable. But it's like, yeah, but you're, like, torturing people in the name of your art.
Yeah.
That's not
Like,
good.
hey, okay, speaking from experience, I've art directed videos. Mind
Mhm.
you, they were like 30 seconds to a minute, so not like a 2-hour film. But
Yes.
still, what was her walking up the stairs? Probably like 30 seconds.
Yeah,
It
it was
does
a whole
not take
movie.
that many takes. I think the most we've ever done is like 3,
Yeah.
maybe
And
4.
also, it's all about creating the environment where if your actress is like, "Oh, my scar from my surgery is hurting," that they can have the thing. I just thought that was such an interesting quote where she's talked about how the fact that, like, oh, it was really important for her as an actress to not be like delicate or a nuisance because
Yeah.
that would ruin my career. And it's so sad that because of the injury she sustained, that it did ruin her career.
That's so
It's
sad.
it's so sad that, Madeleine Carroll also had moments. Oh, this was one where, quote, she said that at times it almost seemed as though he was trying to break his actresses as if they were a wild horse, and poor Carroll found herself handcuffed to co-star Robert Donnet for hours on end during the shoot, being dragged through rivers, ditches, and waterfalls. And so just, like, weird things that he would do. Joan Fontaine was in Rebecca. She thought, okay, this is disgusting and a trigger warning. Yeah. So she like thought she was seeing things when she noticed something like coming out of his fly, his pant fly. And but then it ended up being a champagne cork. And like he just was like, haha, that's so funny. I made her think that my penis was out when it was
Mhm.
like just like gross, lots of just like sexual harassment. He had told a lot of, I don't know, sexual gross jokes. And maybe some of the people he was around thought it was funny, but it obviously made a lot of women uncomfortable. Anyways, those are just some of the allegations and some of the things and stories that the women who have worked with him have come out and said. There's more. There's so many more I could tell. But
Yeah.
like so, I didn't want to dive too much into all of that.
No, you're good. I think the end of this article though that you found where it talks about like in the 60s and 70s, he was basically a living institution at Universal.
Yes.
He was
Mm-hmm.
the 3rd largest shareholder, the god of cinema. He had a oak paneled office, and it was,
Mm-hmm.
like, considered exactly what he deserved for, like, his long career in film.
Yeah.
And they basically said, like, people kept their mouths shut about anything he did
Mm-hmm.
because why would you say anything? Like, they even said Peggy Robinson ran that company, and she knew what was going on, but she also knew that no one would benefit from the world knowing this, which I
It's
beg
so
to argue on that, but
it's so dismissive and sad for the victims.
yeah. So it was just like people were so loyal to him that they wouldn't hear any criticism. And
Mm-hmm.
they were just like, it was like such a thing of the time period. But I'm so sick and tired of hearing that, oh, it was a different time.
That sucked. That was a bad time then.
Yeah, where they say that like powerful men in the movie business had the license to indulge themselves as if
Mm-hmm.
the more power you get, it means you can be a crappier person. I feel like that's
Yeah.
such a tricky philosophy to fall into where it should be the opposite, right? The more power you have, the more power you have to do good. So you should be a
Yeah.
better person.
You'd
I don't
think.
know. You'd think.
Yeah, I think that's what's so sad. Yeah, realizing that, unfortunately, how many people can, I don't know, be convinced to stay silent, but like, because you don't even have to convince them. It's just that they have to be. I read this book. It's actually probably one of the best books I've ever read. I would 100% recommend it, called Catch and Kill. It was a book by Ronan Farrow about basically like the process of breaking the story about Harvey Weinstein. And
Oh,
yes, it was an incredible book because he was one of the first journalists that like was working on this, and he talks about the fact that like all these women were coming and like how difficult it was to like, not difficult it was to get these women to come forward because like of course they would have good reason to be afraid, but like also really shows the ways that it's like they really tried to bury this story like very legitimately, and how many people were very, like, I don't know, okay with being on the wrong side of history, you know? Because
yeah.
now, like, after everything came out, it's okay, it doesn't look good on those people who are
Hmm.
hiding the story. But yeah, I would definitely recommend that book because I think it just does a really great job at showing like the dark sides behind. I don't know. Because like sometimes you're like, but people are good, and why would they like let a horrible man do bad things? And it was just, I don't know. It's really disheartening, but it was a really, I think, impactful read. And I think it goes so much along with Hitchcock because I think it mirrors a lot of what happened with Harvey Weinstein. So
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend it. Like I said, it's called Catch and Kill.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to bring up really quickly, there's a couple of women that were in his films that we didn't mention.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna list them. The most famous ones are we talked about Ingrid Bergman. So she
Mm-hmm.
was in 3 of Hitchcock's films, Spellbound, Notorious, and Under Capricorn. Grace Kelly was in 3 as well. She starred in Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief.
Mm-hmm.
Tippi Hedren was in The Birds and Marnie. We talked about her. Kim Novak was in Vertigo. Janet Leigh was in Psycho, and she's the one from the infamous shower scene. So
Mm-hmm.
there you go.
Iconic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ava Marie Saint was in North by Northwest. Joan Fontaine, that we talked about, was in Rebecca, and she actually won an Academy Award for that role.
Wow.
Carol Lombard starred in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which was Hitchcock's only screwball comedy. So I don't think it's necessarily considered part of his like Hitchcock canon, but he
Yeah,
did
yeah,
direct
yeah.
it. And then Teresa Wright appeared in Shadow of a Doubt. And then Doris Day, actually, who we talked
Mm.
about in the same episode as Grace Kelly, she played in the film The Man Who Knew Too Much and
Mm.
actually sang the song Que Sera Sera, which is interesting. So I actually looked into if any of those others had sexual abuse allegations or like any allegations against him of inappropriate behavior. And the 3 that you brought up were the ones that have
Mm-hmm.
publicly said that they had strained relationships. I think it's important to realize that one thing that could be playing into this is Grace Kelly was already a very notable actor before she started with
Yeah.
Hitchcock.
Mhm.
And you'll notice that right after he did the movies with her is when he hired Tippi Hedren, who was a novice.
Uh,
And I often wonder if it's because Grace Kelly didn't allow him to have the control over her that he
yeah.
would have preferred.
Or maybe he just probably knew he couldn't get away with it,
Yeah.
that, like, he realized he how could you try, she's already a huge movie star.
Yes. She, like, would go on to become the Princess of Monaco. So, I mean, it's not really someone you want on your bad side.
Yeah, mhm.
And I think it was very similar with a couple of the others where they had enough of a prominence that he couldn't really do much about it. And I think that could have led into him hiring more novice and
Mhm.
actors in order to do that. But also, a lot of them may just not have wanted to say anything.
Yeah.
Sadly, it could have been commonplace. They were like, "Oh, he's just like every other director I've worked with." So it come across as much to them, or maybe he was, like, less fascinated, so he was less creepy. But
I
just
don't
saying
know.
that the few women who didn't speak doesn't disregard the women who did, if that makes
Totally.
sense. Because
No,
like, we
I
don't know.
fully agree.
Yeah. And Grace Kelly was running Monaco. She had other things to think about than Alfred Hitchcock.
Very true.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to bring up, I found this really interesting article where it talked about how his like dislike for women and they called it like his mommy issues reflect back in his movies. And it was so interesting. I'm not gonna go into like the whole thing, but it just talks about like how his female characters were treated within his movies and kind of shows his philosophy that he had with women. And I think it shows that like he hated women.
He hated women.
Yeah, I think he really did. So they said like the chief skill of the Hitchcock heroine is to lie, inflict, and then suffer untold torments without ruffling her hem. If you want some
Oh.
full on misogyny, rampant women blaming, and outright abuse or apologism, look no further than Marnie. Marnie is a liar, thief, and all around uptight, frigid piece of trouble who is set up, blackmailed into a forced marriage, and then, trigger warning, like she's raped by her husband. But she tries to kill herself, and then he subjects her to a private investigation, like uncovering her entire past. And it turns out that her entire pathology is the fault of another woman, her mother, who was a prostitute.
Mm.
And so they like it goes into this whole thing where she like ends up having sexual abuse in her past that they like uncover. And that's leading to mental illness that leads to like why she turns into who she is. And yeah. And at
You
the
know
end, she
Yeah, go on.
decides to make it work with her abusive, stalking, blackmailing, rapist husband. The
Okay,
end.
cool.
And that's the movie.
I We talked about this when we talked about Euphoria. I don't remember exactly what episode we brought it up, but we talked about the fact that, what, at this point, I'm suspicious. If a
Mhm.
man is writing stories that are basically torturing women, I don't trust you. I don't
Yeah.
think you have good intentions. I think that you like this a little bit too much. I think you like watching women suffer. And you get the free pass because it's in the name of art and telling stories.
It's in a movie, so you
It's
can
in a
just call
movie.
it's part of the story.
It's part of the story.
And
I think you like it. I think you like watching
mhm,
women suffer. It's really gross.
I agree. It's
I did
really
not know that
awful.
was the plot of Mar.
I actually saw another article I didn't have time for, but it talks about how Marnie it was one of his last films, I think, or, like, towards the very end. It basically broke a lot of the Hitchcock spell for a lot of people because it was so horrid. It is
Mhm.
such a horrible plot. It's not a thriller. It's basically like a story of a traumatized person becoming complacent in their trauma and staying in an abusive relationship. There's nothing fun about watching that. That's not a fun Halloween movie. That's like a biopic on someone's very sad life. You know what I mean? Like, why would you
Yeah.
pick that? So a lot of people argue that Marnie is like the worst film he's ever made because it is. I mean, how could you argue with that plot? That's
Yeah.
gonna be I would
Well,
never watch that.
going back to the YouTube video I watched about Psycho and like analyzing the birds, they were talking about the character of Norman Bates. Have you ever seen Psycho or do you know
No,
it?
but I
I'm sure
remember
the
we
article
read
talked
that
about it.
book of The Science of Women in Horror, and it
Mm,
talked about, like, the mother in that and how, like, they blame the
yes.
mom for the
They blame
serial
the
killer?
mom.
That's, like, the
Yes.
whole thing is that it's not his fault, it's his mom's fault.
I know that character has mommy issues. And when I was watching the YouTube video about the fact that character has mommy issues, I was like, I don't know if Hitchcock is as critical as he needs to be on this is wrong for this
Yeah.
character to hate his mom so much. That's not a good enough reason. A lot of people have like
No.
mommy issues without being a serial killer. You know?
Yeah. I think that's a very justifiable thing to say. Like, I know a lot of people bring up serial killers and they're like, well, it's not their fault. They had a horrible childhood. And it's like, there are thousands of people who have horrible childhoods and don't go on killing rampages. Like, believe
Yeah,
it or
it's
not, you
fine.
can overcome your trauma
I mean,
without killing someone.
that's the idea.
Yeah. They definitely
Yeah.
bring up Psycho as being the one that shows his hatred for women the absolute most. Because it's
Mhm.
just like the idea that, like, even the shower scene, she's like a female thief and a liar. She ran off with some money from her workplace. She signs into Bates Motel under a fake name, and then she's punished because she gets
So it's
stabbed to
like,
death.
yeah, like the crux of his points are like women making mistakes and being silly and being wrong. Maybe not even just like being silly, but like actually maybe being, liars and thieves or whatever. And it's like
Yeah.
then
They
them getting
deserve to
punished.
die.
Yeah, like getting their like the world is like getting justice against women for their crimes.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
definitely, like, the serial killer, he blames his mother
Mm.
instead of, like, himself for the thing
Himself.
that he does. And,
Yeah.
like, weird things with that movie. He, like, tries to get inside her clothes.
Mm,
It's a whole kinda Oedipus thing, but it's weird that we call it Oedipus because you remember in the story of Oedipus, he didn't know it was his mom,
that's true.
whereas
That's
this
true.
very much knew it was his mom.
That's true.
Yeah, and they even brought up I think it's important that you mentioned silly, like, getting mad at women for being silly.
Hmm.
They did bring up in this article as well, the movie Rear Window, and the fact so first off, basically the plot of that movie is that, like, this guy has an injury, and so he's watching out his window at all of his neighbors, and it's really beautifully shot, I have to say. It is a really cool
Yeah.
movie, but he sees this, like, guy kill his wife, and it's because his wife was, like, a shrew, like, she's always yelling and nagging at him,
Mm.
and so he, like, chops her up and then sends her out in, like, different suitcases. And so it's, like, showing, "Oh, well, if you're mean to your husband, he'll kill you." And that's, like, her punishment. But then also, the other one is, like, the girlfriend,
Hmm.
Lisa. She's, like, this glittering socialite, and then throughout the course of the movie, he basically convinces her to go and become, like, an outdoors person with him. And then after he falls asleep, she, like, secretly reads a fashion magazine. So it's, like, kind of getting mad at her for being silly, being like, she should be more interested in his interests, and he's an
Yeah.
adventure photographer, and if she wants to be with him, then that's what she has to do, and yeah, so it definitely just shows, like, even tiny little things like that, which I think are very common in old movies, to be fair, but, like,
Hmm.
just important to realize that, like, he really had a very low opinion of women, and I think it reflects that he definitely had some mommy issues of his own.
Yeah.
Probably needed to work through some things in therapy,
Probably.
and he
Well,
didn't.
yeah, I was gonna say, couple that with like how the women are portrayed, and then also with the way he just treated the actresses. Like life imitates art.
Yes,
And so,
definitely.
case in point, weird dude.
Oof, so true. Okay, lastly, on a happy, happy note, we're gonna talk about two women who were overshadowed by Hitchcock in like fame, even though they were very much so part of the reason why he got his success. Which
Okay,
these are
cool.
the happy ones to talk about because yay.
Like they're awesome.
Yeah, and they contributed a lot to that. So the
Hmm.
first one is Joan Harrison. She's actually a screenwriter, and she was the first female screenwriter to be nominated for the Best Original Screenplay Oscar when the
Oh,
category
cool.
was introduced, which is very cool.
Ah,
And
that
then
is
she was the
cool.
first screenwriter to receive 2 Academy Award nominations in the same year in separate categories for
Mm.
the 2 screenplay films Foreign Correspondent and Rebecca that were both
Hey.
directed by Alfred Hitchcock. He hired her when she was, like, straight out of school, I think, but something I thought was cool is Hedda Hopper, who we have an episode on. She actually described Joan Harrison in 1945 as a golden-haired ball of fire. So I think that shows you, like, who this woman was. She was really beautiful. They often talked about how she was such a glamorous female producer. She had dimples and a 24-inch waist, Which why was it a thing to know what size everyone's waist was back then?
I don't know, but that yeah.
It comes everywhere. But she spent nearly a decade working alongside Alfred Hitchcock, first as his secretary assistant and then as a valued screenwriter. So he sent out a newspaper advert that requested a young lady for a producer of films. Why did it have to be a young lady?
Oh, maybe he was being really progressive and wanted a woman. Just kidding.
Sure.
In my dreamland.
She was like pretty, I don't want to say like she was crafty in how she got the job. She pretended her sister was in labor and that she needed to get back to the hospital, so she bumped herself up the queue and was able to be seen before the position is filled, which maybe
Take notes.
yeah, hot tip.
It's hard getting a job out here.
Yeah. Attracted by both her good looks and her macabre interest in true crime, her uncle was actually a part in charge of assigning cases at police precinct. So, like, she was pretty fascinated. He offered her a job. And however, she was not very interested in being a secretary. And so that could have meant that she would have been fired. But then he realized that she had like a keen sense of story and was like, oh, you'll be my protege. And brought
Oh,
her
cool.
in to be like his sounding board and like
Mhm.
help, and that eventually led to her screenwriting career. It doesn't mean that she was without abuse by him.
Okay.
I don't have a lot of it, but I know that he was very infatuated with her because she was so pretty,
Mhm.
and that there was this instance where he read the toilet scene in James Joyce's Ulysses, which I'm not familiar with, but he like read it to her and it was, like, to embarrass her, and this was the only time that she said she let the director get the better of her because she, like, lost her
Mm.
composure.
But
Yeah.
that's sad because it then I mean, with her saying that was the only time that I lost my composure, it probably shows there were a lot of times that she had to really work to maintain it, which means he was probably doing
Yes.
a lot of things to try and get a rise out of her.
I mean, a decade.
Yeah.
That's a long time to work with someone from everything we've heard about him.
Mhm.
And, like, sadly, but, like, luckily for her, I think with the other young blonde stars, it probably diverted some of his attention, so it wasn't
Mhm.
so focused on her, but she obviously still had to bear the burden of that.
Totally.
She would go on to, like, work on a lot of films with a lot of different directors, so, like, she did end up having a pretty prominent career. Then later, she ended up working in television with Hitchcock because he
Oh, cool.
produced a TV series called Alfred Hitchcock Presents. But there's actually a biography on her by Christina Lane called Phantom Lady, Hollywood producer Joan Harrison, the forgotten
Cool.
woman behind Hitchcock. So
I love
that was
that.
published in 2020, and you can check that out if you want to learn more about her. The other one I wanted to mention was actually his wife.
Oh,
It's
cool.
crazy that we talked about all these sexual assault allegations,
That's
and
sad.
he was married. His wife was actually Alma Reville, and one thing that I thought was cool when it talked about Joan Harrison, it mentioned that she often made up the triangle that was Hitchcock's, like, power dynamic, where it was
Mhm.
him and then his wife and Joan Harrison. So they were this, like, dynamic trio that I think we could say was the basis of his success on his
Yeah.
films. His wife, Alma, she also was a screenwriter and film editor, and so she collaborated on the scripts, including Shadow of a Doubt, Suspicion, The Lady
Mhm.
Vanishes, as well as scripts for other directors as well. So she wasn't just working for him, but
Yeah.
they did work together very closely. Like, I didn't have enough time to find a ton on, like, their relationship. I don't know. Like, she never said anything, I think, like,
Mhm.
directly about him. I mean, it's your husband that you worked really closely with throughout your entire
Marriage and
career.
life.
Like,
Yeah.
that would be really hard to then come out and be like, "He was
Yeah.
horrible."
Like, I won't criticize that at all.
Yeah. So, she did work on preparing and adapting scripts for Rebecca, Foreign Correspondent, Suspicion, Saboteur, as well as working with Joan Harrison very closely on a lot of those.
Oh,
They would
cool.
work on a lot of the scripts at Hitchcock's home in Bel Air because he preferred writing in a comfortable, intimate environment rather than the office. Why does that make me feel suspicious? Ugh. Like,
That's fair.
I would probably prefer writing at home too, but just the fact that he, like,
Yeah, that's
brought
fair.
his screenwriters out to his home, and I'm like,
Yeah. Couple it with everything, and it's not great.
Yeah. She also had a really keen ear for dialogue and, like, she had an editor's sharp eye for scrutinizing a film's final version. So they were able to find, like, tiny little flaws that would have escaped the director or the
Mm.
crew the first time. Apparently, Janet Leigh, like, swallowed after her character's fatal encounter in Psycho. So they had to take that out because she was supposed to be dead.
She was
Dead
yeah.
people don't
Don't
swallow.
swallow. Interesting.
Yeah. And then one other thing to say about her is Charles Champlin, who is one of Hitchcock's closest collaborators, said the Hitchcock touch had 4 hands and 2 were Alma's. So she's often regarded as like the one of the greatest forgotten filmmakers because she's so obscured by like her
Her
husband's large
husband.
shadow. Oh,
Mhm.
in so many ways, like his reputation just preceded them and yet she was such a vital part. When Hitchcock did accept the AFI Life Achievement Award, he said he wanted to mention this is sweet. Maybe this is the sweetest thing he ever did. We'll give him this one moment. But he said when he accepted that award, he wanted to mention 4 people who have given me the most affection, appreciation, and encouragement and constant collaboration. The first of the 4 is a film editor, the second is a scriptwriter, the third is the mother of my daughter Pat, and the fourth is as fine a cook as ever performed miracles in a domestic kitchen. And their names are Alma Reville.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm glad that he publicly was willing to give credit where credit was very much due.
Yes. So we have
Mhm.
one kind moment in this episode of Hitchcock,
Yes.
which I guess is a wonderful way to end. But yeah, like I think there's probably so much more about Alma that we don't even know.
Mhm.
She is being like more recognized now. And you can look up like her filmography. It's a very long, it goes way beyond Hitchcock. She definitely was a prominent part of filmmaking at that time, regardless of the fact that she didn't get as much.
Get the flowers she deserves.
Yeah, it's just she deserved so much more. So
Mhm.
it's really such a bummer, but I think yeah, it's just cool to recognize like the people that did help him build his career the way it was and it very
They're
prominently
women.
was 2 women.
Yeah, that's
So,
so cool.
yeah, but that's Oma Reville and Joan Harrison.
Amazing. Well, that's why I love doing this podcast is because there's always women behind the scenes that are just in, yeah, really big shadows. And it's nice when we can finally like pull back that curtain and see them. So we way to end on a happier note. I'm glad that
Yeah,
you found that.
me too.
Mhm.
One little diamond in the rough. But
Absolutely.
yeah, this episode is in no way to like, dissuade you from watching Alfred Hitchcock films. I think there's a lot to learn about like filmography, directing, screenplay writing, like suspense and horror within them. I think it's just to remember what was behind it. Like if you watch a woman
Hmm.
getting tortured by birds, go, holy crap.
Yeah, like
Like
totally.
that shouldn't have happened.
Hmm.
And also like learn from it if you are like a part of these art forms to make sure that we like break the cycle. We don't need any more Hitchcocks and Weinsteins, like we need people that are willing to stand up for their actors and make sure that it's like a
Directors
safe
are safe.
place
Yeah.
where you're not gonna die because you break open your stitches walking up a flight of
Yeah,
stairs.
that's a trap. Like that's a traumatic
Yeah,
story.
or
I
feel
hate that.
threatened by your boss, like, leaving gifts on your doorstep, like,
Hmm.
yeah, it's just awareness so that it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
happen again.
agree. I fully agree. And I think, I don't know, just when people are like lauded as like these amazing, like visionary, great people, it just, I'm like, let's just have the whole picture. Like we can recognize the amazing things that people did for their art form, but who were they really? And
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know.
no,
Get the whole
agreed.
picture. Don't, I don't know, put
It's
anyone
that
on
whole
a
argument
pedestal.
of separating the art and the artist that,
We talk
to
about
be
that.
honest, I don't
I'm
know if it
still
will ever
figuring
be an
that out.
answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I don't know if
agree.
there ever will be.
I know. I guess there's another episode of our More Than Amused Murder Mystery Month. Thanks for joining us. And we have 2 more episodes actually coming out in relation to Spooky Month. Very excited about them to continue on our Halloween themed month. If you're new here to watching us on YouTube, hello.
Hi.
Hi. Keep hanging out with us. If you have been a long time auditory listener, I don't know. Or just a listener and you prefer long form content on YouTube. We're on there now. We're going to be doing this every week. So you can come say hi, follow us on Instagram, leave us a review, and we'll be back next week.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.